The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the quiet countryside. Alex Carter strolled along the winding dirt path near his small house, his dog, Max, trotting happily beside him. The day had been uneventful, like most days in his peaceful, isolated life. He preferred it that way. No surprises, no chaos, just him, Max, and the gentle hum of nature. But that evening was different. As Alex approached the edge of the woods, he noticed something unusual. A figure sat on a large rock, her form partially hidden by the shadows of the trees. He slowed down, gripping Max's leash tighter. His heart raced, not with fear but curiosity. Visitors were rare in this part of the countryside, and someone sitting alone in the dark seemed out of place. "Hello," Alex called out cautiously. The figure stirred, lifting her head to look at him. His breath caught when he saw her face. She was unlike anyone he'd ever seen. Her skin had a soft blue hue that seemed almost luminous in the fading light, and her hair, white as fresh snow, fell in gentle waves over her shoulders. She had delicate features, her large, deep eyes filled with something Alex couldn't quite place. Sadness, perhaps. Loneliness. "I didn't mean to scare you," Alex said, taking a hesitant step closer. "Are you okay?" The woman tilted her head, studying him as if deciding whether to trust him. After a moment, she nodded. "I'm fine," she said softly, though her voice wavered slightly. I don't have anywhere to go." Alex frowned, his curiosity deepening. "What do you mean? Are you lost?" She hesitated before replying, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could say that." Max barked, wagging his tail as he stepped closer to the woman. She reached out cautiously, letting him sniff her hand before gently stroking his fur. The simple act seemed to ease some of the tension in her shoulders. Alex glanced around, unsure of what to do. He wasn't the type to ignore someone in need, but this situation was unusual, to say the least. "Do you live around here?" he asked, though he was almost certain of the answer. She shook her head. "No, I've traveled far." She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. "Very far." The way she said it made Alex's skin prickle. He didn't press her for details, sensing that she wasn't ready to share more. Instead, he took a deep breath and asked, "Do you need help? I mean, you're welcome to stay at my place for the night. It's not much, but it's warm, and there's food." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, she looked as though she might cry. "Really?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You'd do that for me?" Alex shrugged, trying to downplay his own nerves. "It's just one night," he said. "I couldn't leave you out here alone." She gave him a small, grateful smile that softened her features. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. As they walked back to his house, Alex couldn't help but glance at her every so often. Who was she, really? Why was she out here alone, with no place to go? There was something otherworldly about her, something that made him wonder if her story was far more complicated than she let on. But for now, he decided not to ask too many questions. She was clearly in need, and that was enough for him to offer her kindness. Little did Alex know, this act of compassion would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. Alex led the way back to his small but cozy home, the sound of their footsteps crunching softly on the dirt path. The mysterious woman followed closely behind, her gaze darting around as if every leaf and shadow might hold some hidden danger. Alex couldn't help but notice how quiet she was, her movements careful, almost too deliberate. Max trotted beside her, occasionally glancing up at her with what Alex could only describe as curiosity. When they reached the house, Alex opened the door and motioned for her to step inside. The warm light from the kitchen lamp spilled onto her face, revealing just how tired she looked. Dark circles rimmed her striking eyes, and her shoulders sagged as though carrying an invisible weight. "It's not much, but make yourself comfortable," Alex said, setting his keys on the counter. He gestured to the living room couch. You can sit there while I get you something to eat." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and quietly lowered herself onto the couch. Max hopped up next to her, wagging his tail and resting his head on her lap. She looked down at the dog, her lips curving into a faint smile as she absent-mindedly stroked his fur. Alex watched the interaction for a moment before heading into the kitchen. As he opened the fridge and pulled out leftovers, he couldn't help but wonder again who this woman was. Her skin, her hair, the way she spoke, it all hinted at something unusual. But he pushed those thoughts aside. Right now, she was just someone who needed help. A few minutes later, he returned with a plate of reheated pasta and a glass of water. "Here you go," he said, setting them down on the coffee table in front of her. She looked at the food, then back at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. "Thank you," she said softly. Alex sat down in the armchair across from her, giving her space. "So," he began, trying to sound casual, "you said you've traveled far. Where from, exactly?" The woman froze, her hand hovering over the fork. For a moment, Alex thought she might not answer. Then she sighed and set the fork down. "It's hard to explain," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think you believe me." "Try me," Alex said with a small smile. "I've heard my fair share of weird stories." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something. "Trust, perhaps." Finally, she said, "I come from a place far beyond what you know. A world that's very different from this one." Alex raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. He wanted her to feel comfortable enough to keep talking. "I left because I didn't belong there anymore," she continued. "It wasn't safe for me. I didn't know where else to go, so I came here. But I didn't realize how lonely it would be." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Alex felt a pang of sympathy. He didn't fully understand what she meant, but her sadness was real. "Well," he said gently, "you're not alone anymore. At least not tonight." Her gaze softened, and for the first time, she looked a little less guarded. "Your kind," she said. "Not many would do what you've done." Alex shrugged, trying to hide his own awkwardness. "It's no big deal. Everyone needs help sometimes." She picked up the fork and took a bite of the pasta. Her eyes widened slightly, and she gave a small, appreciative nod. "This is good." Alex chuckled. "It's just leftovers, but I'm glad you like it." The rest of the evening passed quietly. She didn't say much more, and Alex didn't press her. When it was time for bed, he showed her to the guest room. "If you need anything, just let me know," he said. "Thank you, Alex," she replied, her voice soft but sincere. As Alex lay in his own bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn he wasn't prepared for. Who was she really? And what had she left behind? He didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was certain. This wasn't going to be an ordinary week. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, filling Alex's small house with a warm glow. He woke to the sound of Max scratching at the bedroom door, eager for his usual morning routine. As Alex stretched and got out of bed, the events of the previous night came rushing back to him. The mysterious woman, Lyra, as she had introduced herself, was still here. After feeding Max and brewing a cup of coffee, Alex glanced toward the guest room door. It was slightly ajar. He hesitated for a moment before walking over and gently knocking. "Lyra, you awake?" There was no response, so Alex pushed the door open slightly. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, and the blanket she had used was folded at the foot. For a brief moment, Alex wondered if she had left during the night, but then he heard a faint sound from outside. Stepping onto the porch, Alex spotted Lyra standing in the garden. She was barefoot, her pale blue skin catching the morning light, and her white hair flowing gently in the breeze. She seemed lost in thought as she stared at a small flower blooming in the corner of the yard. Max was sitting nearby, his tail wagging as if he had already accepted her as part of their little household. Alex approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Good morning," he said. Lyra turned her head, a small smile forming on her lips. "Good morning," she replied softly. "I didn't expect you to be up so early," Alex said, leaning against the porch railing. "Do you always start your day like this?" She shrugged, her gaze returning to the flower. "It's calming. Your world is quieter than mine. I like it." Alex didn't press her for details, sensing that she wasn't ready to share more. Instead, he said, "I was about to make breakfast. You hungry?" Her smile widened just a little. "Yes, thank you." Back inside, Alex cooked a simple meal of scrambled eggs and toast. As they sat at the kitchen table, he noticed how Lyra studied everything. The food, the utensils, even the sunlight streaming through the window. As if she were seeing it all for the first time. It was both fascinating and puzzling. "So," Alex began cautiously, "how are you feeling today?" Lyra hesitated, her fork pausing midair. "Better," she said. "I don't feel as heavy as I did yesterday." "Good," Alex said with a nod. "If you need anything, just let me know. I'm not used to having a house guest, but I'll do my best." Lyra chuckled softly, the sound light and almost musical. "You're doing more than enough, Alex. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he replied. "I'm just glad you're safe." They ate in comfortable silence for a while before Lyra finally spoke again. "You said you're not used to having a house guest. Do you live here alone?" "Yeah," Alex said, glancing out the window. "It's just me and Max. I like the quiet, you know. Keeps life simple." Lyra nodded, as if she understood that more than he realized. Sometimes quiet is good, but too much, it can feel like a cage. Alex studied her for a moment, sensing there was a deeper meaning behind her words. "Is that why you left your home? To escape the quiet?" Lyra's expression darkened slightly, and she set her fork down. "It wasn't just quiet. It was empty, lonely. No one cared, not really. I couldn't stay there anymore." Alex's chest tightened at the sadness in her voice. He wanted to say something comforting but wasn't sure how. Instead, he reached over and placed a hand on hers. "You're not alone anymore," he said firmly. "Not here." Lyra looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. In that moment, Alex realized something important. This wasn't just about helping someone in need. Lyra had brought a sense of purpose into his life that he hadn't felt in years. And as strange as her presence was, he couldn't imagine sending her away. The next few days passed quietly, but not without their challenges. Lyra, despite her delicate appearance, was eager to help around the house. She insisted on doing simple tasks like washing dishes or tending to the small garden. However, her unfamiliarity with certain human objects often led to humorous mishaps. One morning, Alex found her staring intensely at the washing machine, her head tilted in confusion. "It's not dangerous," Alex said with a chuckle as he stepped into the laundry room. "It's just a machine for cleaning clothes." Lyra glanced at him, her expression skeptical. "It sounds angry," she said, pointing to the loud, spinning drum. Alex laughed, something he hadn't done so freely in a long time. "That's just the spin cycle. It's supposed to do that." Her lips twitched into a small smile. "Your world is full of strange things." "You'll get used to it," Alex replied, handing her a basket of clean laundry. "Here, help me fold these. No spinning parts involved." As they worked side by side, Alex couldn't help but notice how quickly Lyra seemed to adapt. She was curious about everything, asking questions about the simplest items, light switches, coffee makers, even the way doors latched shut. Her questions, though basic, made Alex see his mundane life in a new light. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alex found Lyra sitting on the porch, her gaze fixed on the stars. He stepped outside, holding 2 mugs of tea, and handed one to her. "Thanks," she said softly, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Do you miss it?" Alex asked after a moment of silence. "Miss what?" "Your home, wherever you came from." Lyra was quiet for a long time, her eyes shimmering as they reflected the night sky. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it wasn't really home, not in the way this is starting to feel." Alex felt a strange warmth in his chest at her words. "Well, I'm glad you feel that way," he said. "You're welcome here as long as you need." Lyra turned to him, her expression both grateful and serious. "You're a good person, Alex. I've met so many who wouldn't even look at me, let alone offer me kindness. I don't know why you're different, but I'm glad you are." Alex shrugged, feeling a little self-conscious. "I guess I just believe everyone deserves a chance. And you're not like anyone I've ever met." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment before she looked away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. Just as Alex was about to respond, Max barked loudly from inside the house. Both of them turned toward the sound, their peaceful moment interrupted. Alex set his mug down and went to investigate, Lyra close behind him. When they entered the living room, they found Max standing by the window, his fur bristling. Alex followed his gaze and froze. Outside, near the edge of the woods, a faint light flickered. It wasn't natural, like moonlight or fireflies. It was sharper, almost mechanical, and it seemed to pulse rhythmically. Lyra's face paled, and her grip on Alex's arm tightened. "They found me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Alex's heart raced. "Who?" he asked, though he suspected the answer. "The ones I ran from," Lyra said, her eyes wide with fear. "They're here." Alex's protective instincts kicked in. "Stay inside," he said firmly. "Lock the doors. I'll check it out." "No." Lyra grabbed his arm. "You don't understand. They're dangerous." "So am I," Alex replied, his jaw set with determination. Lyra stared at him, her fear mingling with something else. "Trust," she nodded reluctantly, and Alex grabbed a flashlight and a heavy wrench from his toolbox. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, he couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet life was about to become anything but ordinary. The night air was colder than usual, and Alex felt a chill run down his spine as he stepped outside. The faint light near the edge of the woods continued to pulse rhythmically, casting an eerie glow against the trees. He tightened his grip on the wrench in his hand, his instincts screaming at him to turn back. But one look at the fear in Lyra's eyes earlier was enough to push him forward. Max followed at his side, growling low in his throat. "Stay close," Alex whispered to the dog, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. As he approached the source of the light, Alex's heart pounded harder. He could hear faint mechanical whirring, a sound that didn't belong in the quiet countryside. When he reached the edge of the woods, he stopped and crouched behind a thick tree trunk, peering around cautiously. There it was. A sleek, metallic device about the size of a small car hovered a few feet above the ground. It emitted a soft hum and pulsed with the same sharp, rhythmic light he'd seen from the house. It looked alien, like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. But this wasn't fiction. It was real, and it was here. Alex scanned the area for movement, his adrenaline spiking when he saw two figures standing near the device. They were tall and thin, their bodies wrapped in dark, metallic suits that glinted faintly under the pulsing light. Their faces were hidden behind smooth, featureless helmets, but their movements were purposeful, almost predatory. Lyra wasn't exaggerating. Alex muttered under his breath. Whoever, or whatever, these were, they were definitely not friendly. Max let out a low growl, and Alex quickly placed a hand on his head to quiet him. The figures seemed preoccupied with the device, their gestures indicating some sort of adjustment or activation process. Whatever they were doing, it couldn't be good. Alex's mind raced. He had no weapons, no plan, and no idea how to deal with these intruders. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let them find Lyra. As he considered his options, a sudden movement caught his eye. One of the figures turned toward the house, their helmet tilting slightly as if scanning the area. Alex's stomach dropped. If they decided to head in that direction, Lyra would be defenseless. Without thinking, Alex grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it into the woods, aiming for the opposite direction. The rock hit a tree with a loud thunk, and the sound echoed through the night. Both figures turned sharply toward the noise, their postures tense. "Come on, take the bait," Alex whispered, his heart pounding. One of the figures moved toward the source of the sound, their steps silent but deliberate. The other stayed near the device, their focus shifting between the woods and the machine. Alex knew he had only a few moments to act. Summoning every ounce of courage, Alex crept closer to the device, staying low and using the trees for cover. He didn't know what he was doing, but his gut told him he needed to disable it. When he was close enough, he swung the heavy wrench with all his strength, smashing it into what looked like a control panel on the side of the machine. The device sparked and let out a loud, angry whine as the pulsing light flickered and died. The figure near the machine spun around, their helmeted gaze locking onto Alex. For a split second, Alex froze, his body screaming at him to run. Then Max barked fiercely, lunging at the figure. The distraction was enough for Alex to regain his senses. He grabbed the flashlight and bolted back toward the house, Max hot on his heels. Behind him, he could hear the figures shouting in a language he didn't understand, their voices distorted and mechanical. But Alex didn't stop. He reached the porch, threw the door open, and slammed it shut behind him, locking it tightly. Lyra was waiting in the living room, her face pale with fear. "What happened?" she asked, her voice shaking. "They're here," Alex said, catching his breath. "But I think I bought us some time. We need a plan. Lyra. Fast." Lyra's expression hardened, determination replacing her fear. "Then let's make one," she said. For the first time, Alex realized just how strong she truly was, and he knew they'd face whatever came next together. The tension inside the house was thick as Alex and Lyra stood in the dimly lit living room. Max paced nervously, his ears perked and his tail low. Outside, faint sounds echoed from the woods, sharp clicks and hums that didn't belong to any earthly creature. Alex gripped the wrench tighter in his hand, his knuckles white. "They'll come for the house," Lyra said, her voice steady but grim. "They won't stop until they find me." Alex glanced at her. She looked calm on the surface, but he could see the fear in her eyes. "Then we'll make sure they don't find you," he said firmly. "We've got a head start. Tell me what we're up against." Lyra hesitated for a moment before speaking. "They're hunters," she explained, "sent to track down fugitives like me. They have advanced technology, far beyond anything here, but they rely on their scanners and machines. If we can disrupt those, we can buy more time." Alex nodded, his mind racing. "Disrupt their scanners. Okay, what can we use?" Lyra looked around the room, her gaze landing on Alex's toolbox near the kitchen. "Do you have anything that generates electromagnetic interference? Something to scramble their signals?" Alex thought for a moment, then snapped his fingers. "My old generator. It's not perfect, but it might work. If I rig it with some of your tech, can we boost its output?" Lyra's expression brightened slightly. "Yes, if we overload it, it could create a burst strong enough to mask my presence." "Great," Alex said. "Let's get to work." The two quickly moved to the garage, where the generator sat covered in a thin layer of dust. Lyra knelt beside it, her delicate fingers working quickly to open the casing. Alex handed her tools and wires, following her instructions as they improvised a plan. "I need something to act as a signal amplifier," Lyra said, glancing around the cluttered space. Alex rummaged through a pile of spare parts and pulled out an old radio antenna. "Will this do?" Lyra's eyes lit up. "Perfect." As they worked, Alex couldn't help but marvel at her skill. She moved with precision, her understanding of technology far surpassing anything he'd seen before. But it wasn't just her knowledge that impressed him. It was her determination. Despite the danger, she was focused, her fear replaced by a quiet strength. Finally, Lyra stepped back, wiping her hands on a rag. "It's ready," she said. "But once we activate it, they'll know. It'll disrupt their scanners, but it'll also act like a beacon. They'll come straight for us." Alex nodded, his jaw set. "Then we'll be ready." They moved the modified generator to the living room and connected it to a power source. Alex checked the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. He grabbed a baseball bat from the closet, adding it to his makeshift arsenal. Lyra stood by the generator, her hands hovering over the controls. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, looking at Alex. He met her gaze and smiled. "No, but I've come this far. I'm not backing down now." Lyra gave a small nod, her expression softening. "Thank you, Alex, for everything." Before he could respond, a loud noise outside made them both freeze. It was a sharp metallic screech, followed by the sound of footsteps, fast and deliberate. They were coming. Lyra took a deep breath and flipped the switch on the generator. The machine roared to life, emitting a low hum that quickly grew into a high-pitched whine. The lights in the house flickered as the electromagnetic pulse spread outward. Outside, the footsteps faltered. The hunters' mechanical sounds grew erratic, as if their systems were malfunctioning. Alex peeked through the curtains and saw the figures stumbling, their movements disoriented. "It's working," he whispered. But the victory was short-lived. One of the hunters raised a device, aiming it directly at the house. A sharp beam of light shot out, striking the front door with a deafening crack. The door splintered, and Max barked furiously, leaping to Alex's side. "They're breaking in," Lyra shouted. Alex tightened his grip on the bat and stepped forward. "Not if I can help it," he said. "Stay behind me." As the front door gave way, the hunters stepped inside, their forms towering and menacing. Alex felt a surge of adrenaline as he swung the bat with all his strength, determined to protect the home and the woman, who had become more important to him than he ever expected. The door splintered completely, pieces flying across the room as the hunters stepped inside. Their tall, metallic forms gleamed under the flickering lights, their movements mechanical but calculated. Alex took a deep breath, his heart pounding like a drum. He tightened his grip on the bat and positioned himself between the intruders and Lyra. "Stay back," Alex shouted, his voice firm despite the fear coursing through him. Max growled beside him, baring his teeth. The lead hunter tilted its helmeted head, as if analyzing him. A strange, distorted voice emerged from a small speaker on its chest. "Step aside, human. We have no interest in you." Alex shook his head, his jaw set. "You're not taking her." The hunter didn't respond. Instead, it raised a long, sleek weapon, the barrel glowing faintly. Alex barely had time to react before a blast of energy shot toward him. He dove to the side, the beam narrowly missing him and striking the wall behind him, leaving a smoldering hole. "Alex," Lyra's voice called out, filled with panic. "I'm fine," he yelled back, scrambling to his feet. He swung the bat with all his strength, aiming for the weapon in the hunter's hand. The bat connected with a loud clang, sending the weapon skidding across the floor. The other hunter moved to attack, but Max leaped forward, snapping at its legs. The distraction gave Alex enough time to grab the fallen weapon. He had no idea how to use it, but he pointed it at the hunters, hoping for the best. The weapon hummed in his hands, its grip surprisingly warm. Alex pressed a button on the side, and a bright beam shot out, hitting the second hunter square in the chest. Sparks flew as the hunter staggered back, its metallic body crackling with energy. "Lyra," Alex called out, "is the generator still working?" "Yes," she replied from behind the couch, where she had taken cover. But it won't hold them off for long. Their systems will adapt. Alex gritted his teeth. Then we need to end this now. The first hunter lunged toward him, faster than he expected. It knocked the weapon from his hands and sent him crashing to the floor. The air rushed out of his lungs as he hit the ground, but he rolled to the side just in time to avoid the hunter's heavy foot coming down where his head had been. Max barked and lunged again, this time clamping his jaws onto the hunter's arm. The creature shook him off, but the distraction gave Alex a chance to grab the bat again. He swung it upward, striking the hunter's helmet with a resounding crack. The helmet shattered, revealing a face beneath, part machine, part flesh. Its glowing eyes locked onto Alex, filled with rage. Lyra suddenly appeared beside him, holding a small device she had pulled from the generator. "Move," she shouted. Alex rolled out of the way as Lyra threw the device at the hunters. It hit the floor and erupted in a burst of light and sound. The hunters froze, their bodies twitching as the pulse scrambled their systems. They fell to the ground, sparks flying from their joints. For a moment, the house was silent except for the crackling of damaged circuits. Alex sat up, breathing heavily, and looked at Lyra. What was that? "An overload pulse," she said, her voice shaky. "It disables their systems temporarily, but it won't last long. We need to leave." Alex nodded, his mind racing. "Where do we go?" "There's a place nearby," Lyra said. "A safe house I set up when I first arrived. It's hidden and shielded. They won't find us there." Alex glanced at Max, who stood by his side, still growling softly. "All right," he said, getting to his feet. "Let's move." As they gathered their things, Alex couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and dread. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. He glanced at Lyra, her determination shining through her fear, and knew one thing for sure: they would face whatever came next together. The night was heavy with silence as Alex, Lyra, and Max slipped out the back door of the house. The air was thick with tension, each step feeling louder than it was. Behind them, the damaged hunters lay sprawled on the floor, their systems temporarily shut down. But Alex knew it was only a matter of time before they reactivated. They had to move quickly. Lyra led the way, clutching the small device in her hand. "The safe house isn't far," she whispered, "but we have to stay off the main paths." Alex nodded, gripping the baseball bat tightly in one hand and keeping Max close by his side. He didn't trust the quiet. It felt like the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay focused. Lyra was counting on him. As they moved deeper into the forest, Alex glanced at Lyra. She looked calm, but her eyes betrayed her fear. "How much further?" he asked in a low voice. "About a mile," she replied. "It's hidden in an old cave system. We'll be safe there for a while." Alex frowned. "A while? What happens after that?" Lyra hesitated, her steps faltering. "I don't know," she admitted. "I didn't expect them to find me so soon. I thought I'd have more time." Alex placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure it out," he said firmly. "One step at a time." Lyra gave him a small, grateful smile before continuing forward. Max sniffed the air, his ears twitching as he stayed alert for any signs of danger. The forest seemed darker than usual, the trees casting long, eerie shadows under the faint moonlight. After what felt like an eternity, Lyra stopped and pointed to a large, moss-covered boulder. "There," she said. "The entrance is hidden behind that." Alex stepped forward, examining the boulder. It looked like any other rock in the forest, but as Lyra pressed a sequence of buttons on her device, a section of the ground beside it slid open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the earth. "Impressive," Alex muttered. Lyra gestured for him to go first. "Hurry. It'll close automatically once we're inside." Alex descended the stairs cautiously, his flashlight illuminating the rough stone walls. The air grew cooler as they went deeper, and the faint hum of hidden machinery filled the space. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage opened into a small, dimly lit chamber. The safe house was Spartan but functional. A small cot sat in one corner, surrounded by shelves filled with strange-looking tools and devices. A console blinked softly against the far wall, displaying data Alex couldn't begin to understand. "It's not much," Lyra said, stepping inside and closing the entrance behind them. "But it's secure." Alex set the bat down and took a deep breath, letting the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. "It's better than nothing," he said. "How long do you think we have before they figure out where we've gone?" Lyra moved to the console, her fingers flying over the controls. "The pulse I used back at the house disrupted their tracking systems, but they'll repair themselves eventually. A day, maybe two. We need to decide our next move before then." Alex sat on the cot, his mind racing. "What about your people? Is there anyone who can help you?" Lyra shook her head, her expression dark. "No. I left my world because there was no one I could trust. I'm on my own." "You're not on your own anymore," Alex said firmly. "We'll figure this out together." Lyra looked at him, her eyes glistening. "You don't have to do this, Alex. You've already risked so much for me." Alex stood and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. Besides, you've made my life a lot more interesting," he said with a small smile. Lyra chuckled softly, the sound bringing a brief warmth to the cold chamber. But the moment was short-lived as a sharp beep sounded from the console. Lyra's face fell. "They've started repairing their systems," she said. "We don't have much time." Alex nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then we'd better be ready." As they began preparing for the inevitable confrontation, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about standing up for something bigger, something worth fighting for. And for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. The hum of the safe house grew louder as the hours passed. Alex paced the small chamber, gripping the bat in his hands, while Lyra worked at the console, her fingers flying over the buttons. Max lay at the door, his ears twitching with every faint noise from above. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every second feel like an hour. "They'll be here soon," Lyra said, her voice steady but tense. "Their systems are almost fully repaired." Alex stopped pacing and looked at her. "Do we have a plan?" Lyra hesitated before nodding. "I've rigged the safe house's power core. If I overload it, it'll create a pulse strong enough to knock them out completely. But, Alex prompted, sensing the hesitation in her voice. "It'll destroy the safe house," Lyra admitted. "And there's a chance it might not work. If they're close enough to the core, it'll disable them. If they're not, we'll be defenseless." Alex considered her words carefully. "Do we have any other options?" Lyra shook her head. "This is the best chance we've got." "Then we'll make it work," Alex said firmly. "Tell me what you need me to do." Lyra glanced at him, her expression softening. "I'll handle the console. You just need to hold them off long enough for me to activate the pulse." Alex nodded, his grip tightening on the bat. "I can do that." A loud metallic screech echoed from above, cutting through the silence. Max shot to his feet, barking furiously. Alex and Lyra exchanged a glance, both knowing what the sound meant. The hunters had found them. "They're here," Lyra said, her voice trembling slightly. Alex moved to the base of the staircase, his heart pounding. The screeching grew louder, followed by the heavy thud of boots on the steps. Shadows flickered against the walls as the hunters descended, their sleek, metallic forms illuminated by the faint glow of their weapons. "Alex, be careful," Lyra called out. He didn't respond, his focus entirely on the figures approaching. The first hunter reached the bottom of the stairs, its weapon raised. Without hesitation, Alex swung the bat, the force of the blow sending the weapon clattering to the ground. The hunter staggered but didn't fall. The second hunter appeared, aiming its weapon at Alex, but Max leaped forward, his teeth sinking into the hunter's arm. The creature let out a distorted roar, struggling to shake the dog off. Alex used the distraction to swing again, this time hitting the first hunter square in the chest. Sparks flew as the blow connected, but the hunter remained standing. "Alex, I need more time," Lyra shouted from the console. "I'm working on it." Alex yelled back, dodging a swipe from the first hunter. He grabbed a nearby metal pipe and used it to block the next attack, the clash ringing out like a bell in the confined space. The second hunter finally managed to throw Max off, sending the dog skidding across the floor. But Max quickly scrambled to his feet, growling and ready to attack again. Alex felt a surge of pride at the dog's bravery, even as he struggled to keep the hunters at bay. "Lyra, now would be a good time," Alex called out, sweat dripping down his face. "Almost there," Lyra replied, her hands moving frantically over the console. The hum of the power core grew louder, the lights in the chamber flickering wildly. The first hunter lunged at Alex, its strength overwhelming. It pinned him against the wall, its glowing eyes inches from his face. Alex gritted his teeth, using all his strength to push back. "Lyra," he shouted, his voice trained. "Done," she cried, slamming her hand on the final button. A blinding burst of light filled the chamber, accompanied by a deafening roar. The hunters froze, their bodies jerking violently as the pulse overloaded their systems. Sparks flew, and with a final distorted screech, both hunters collapsed to the ground, motionless. Alex stumbled forward, coughing from the acrid smell of burnt circuits. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Lyra nodded, her face pale but relieved. "It worked. They're down." Max barked once, wagging his tail as he stood beside Alex. Alex patted the dog's head before turning to Lyra. "What about the safe house?" Lyra looked around, her expression bittersweet. "It's unstable. We need to leave." Together, they climbed the stairs, leaving the ruined safe house behind. Outside, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, casting the forest in a golden light. Alex turned to Lyra, a small smile on his face. "What now?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We keep going," she said, "together." As they walked into the morning light, Alex couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope. The battle was over, but their journey had only just begun.